we are now bringing in legal analyst Brian Silber. Thank you so much again for joining us here on Live Now to really break down. There's a lot of news that came out of this affidavit that we have not heard about yet. So this is a big day, and we just saw Brian there in the courtroom.
Yeah, absolutely. So my first impression is that, the hearing itself is fairly standard. This happens in every case. The person's brought before the judge, they're advised of their charges. And in any case that has a victim or a victim family involved, the court will almost always order a no contact order. And that's just standard form so that there's no harassing contact. Certainly in a case that involves violence, that is a very normal protocol to have. Nobody should really read into it. That's something that happens literally in every single case, of this type. But I got to tell you, I've seen a copy of that probable cause affidavit, and the one word that comes to mind is bone chilling. That's what I would say about it. It's absolutely bone chilling.
Yeah, I think you pinned it perfect there. Bone chilling is the great word. Let's go through this a little bit from the affidavit. Some of the key takeaways that I saw were that the big one, authorities had this guy pinned just 2 weeks after the November 13th murders there. So when we were seeing these updates from officials, they obviously didn't want to say a lot because they didn't want to tip him off there. But that is big because they knew who they were looking for really quickly.
They did. And I think if I were to guess what the delay was, it takes time for them to get answers to a lot of the things they were looking into. For instance, a DNA lab just needs time to do a DNA test. It's not something that's produced from one day to the next. Sometimes they can take over 30 days to get done. Same thing when they're requesting cell phone data from cellular providers. In that affidavit, a lot of emphasis was given to the location of his cell phone at different times of this case. And again, that's something where you have another company responding to a law enforcement subpoena. They can happen very quickly or they can take time. Again, they may have had to go back. Maybe they weren't given what they needed. So I can see now why it took a little bit of time for them to develop their case before making an arrest.
And one of the other big things that I was seeing, Brian, so far from this case that is really interesting when you talk about investigations as well. Earlier this week, we saw the two videos from police that he was pulled over when he was traveling with his father there. And now we're being told the new details coming out today is that the FBI requested those pullovers to Brian there. So that is something big to really take in as well, just to kind of really show how this investigation was going.
Absolutely. At first glance, I really thought the traffic stops had nothing to do with this case, because on the particular highway where he was stopped, I-70, law enforcement pulls over out-of-state vehicles all the time. And they're interdiction stops. They're looking for narcotics. They're looking for large sums of currency. Pretty standard. But apparently, as it turns out, they've been tracking him for quite a while. And I read an article today that they wanted the Indiana State Police to pull him over to see if they could get some body cam footage of his hands. I don't know if that's true or not. But the thing that struck out to me is that in every photo we have seen of this guy, there isn't a single scratch on him. Obviously these pictures are taken a month after the fact, but I remember the O.J. Simpson trial, he was acquitted, but I remember the cut to his hand was a very prominent piece of evidence in that case. And this case, considering there were 4 stabbing homicides, at least 2 of the victims had defensive wounds, you would think that this guy was injured also. Certainly that's what the FBI was interested in determining, but there was nothing there. So that raises a question that I think the defense team will definitely want to look at.
Yes, absolutely. And what about also another really key takeaway in this affidavit, Brian, was that we learned that one of the roommates saw an individual that they believed to be, now when you look back at everything, to be Brian, but they saw the individual and didn't say anything and then just locked themselves in the room for hours.
So that's the part that made the chill go up my spine. You know, the worst thing anybody wants to see at 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever time it was that night is a man running through their house with a mask on, dressed in all black. That has got to be the scariest thing possible. And I really sympathize with the person that experienced that. And I absolutely understand and do not fault her for locking herself in her bedroom and not wanting to come out for a period of time. I think that's a normal reaction that any person would have. But you're right. You make a very good point. Why did he pass over her? What was this about? You know, it kind of suggests to me that maybe there was something specific about the 4 victims that are involved in this case. You know, I don't know what it is, why maybe he targeted them or didn't target them allegedly. But clearly this remaining person was not a target. Or it could be as simple as he just committed 4 murders and he's realizing he's got to get out of there. He didn't have time maybe to complete his task, or maybe he didn't expect this person to be there. Could have been a surprise to him. You know, there's many avenues that this evidence can take. And I think as this case progresses, the answers are going to start falling into place.
Yeah, and we will be there every step of the way. The story has really captured a lot of people's attention across the country. And really, you know, in this day and age with social media, there were so many people that were their own pretty much detectives. It didn't matter if they lived here in the States or anywhere across the country. I think they were their own detective sleuths as well. And they were taking this all in. And is that another reason why we probably, when the police were giving updates, they were so, you know, they really weren't updates at all, frankly, because of the limited information we were getting? But was it because they just knew that there were so many people intrigued about this case and they didn't really want them to uncover something that they didn't want out there public yet?
So at first I thought it was rather suspicious why they were being so silent. But since I saw a video clip where someone was saying something to the effect that there's a law in Idaho where they are not allowed to disclose the contents of a probable cause affidavit until that person is magistrated in court. I don't practice in the state of Idaho. I'm not familiar with that rule, but it reminds me of something in federal court where I do practice. You know, when there's an arrest warrant for somebody, the indictment that has all the charges in it is typically under seal. And that's so that the person is not tipped off that they're in imminent danger of being arrested. And it's not until they're brought into custody and brought before the judge that an order is issued by the court unsealing the indictment. So I figure Idaho probably has a similar law. You know, insofar as the public, I'm sure the police officers investigating this case wanted to share as much as they could. You know, the more information they share with the public in a case like this, the more help they might get. And I'm not talking about the kind of help where you have like an amateur investigator sitting in his basement, you know, thinking he knows what he's talking about. I'm talking about eyewitnesses, people that saw something, people that might have an actual piece of evidence to contribute. But, you know, there's that balance. They're obviously bound by the rules of their state.
Yeah, it's so true, so true. Another thing I want to talk to you about, Brian, as well, is from the affidavit, we learned that his cell phone, the suspect's cell phone, pinged around that area 12 different times. Now, could this be looked into something as, you know, was he planning this, you know, in detail, and was he, you know, just a stalker type level here? What can we look into that part of the affidavit there with the cell phone?
So for my purposes as a lawyer, I don't see it from that perspective initially. You know, that's obviously where I think a lot of the exciting part for the true crime sleuths comes in. But for me, as a practitioner in the courtroom, the defense team has to go and check into this evidence, make sure it's accurate, make sure it's true. Just because the police say it so doesn't make it so. So that's one of the primary areas of investigation for the defense team right now, number one. Number two, the part that really stuck out to me is not where his phone was pinging, it's when it was not pinging. According to the probable cause affidavit, at the time of the homicides, his phone was not connected to the network. Now, that could mean he was in an area where there's poor cell service, which may not be uncommon in that part of Idaho, or he disconnected his phone from the network so that he couldn't be tracked. Of course, this is all conjecture. These are things that need to be looked at, but it's certainly one of the aspects of the affidavit that stuck out in my mind.
Yeah, that was another big one that we zeroed in. If you're just joining us here, everyone, on Live Now from Fox, we are taking a look here at just moments ago. Bryan Kohberger made his first court appearance there in Idaho, and we are talking to Brian Silber, legal analyst, helping us break down all of the big day of news that came out of this case. It came all in one big tidal wave here with the affidavit and probable cause that we all got. Now, what is going to be the next steps here for Brian here, and when can we see a possible trial date?
So the next step will be a hearing called arraignment. Okay, at arraignment, the defendant will be brought before the judge that will preside over his case, which can be a different judge than the one that handled the hearing today, who only handled the magistrate portion. And at that time, he will be apprised of the formal charges he's facing, and he'll be asked to determine whether or not he's pleading guilty, not guilty, or no contest. Obviously, he's going to plead not guilty. When a case is pled not guilty, it then affords the defense an opportunity to conduct their investigation. They will engage in what's called discovery with the prosecution. The prosecution has a duty to disclose all the evidence that they have collected in the case. In some states, and I'm not sure if this is the case in Idaho, but in some states, the defense is entitled to do depositions where they're able to bring in every witness in a case and basically question them about what they know. I expect between now and the trial date for there to be a lot of litigation. There's going to be a bunch of motions filed by the defense. Certainly, they're going to want to compel evidence. They might have some motions to suppress evidence because maybe there was a violation of procedure committed by the police and how they acquired that evidence. For instance, I don't believe the traffic stop in Indiana was a legal one. I think it was pretextual because they wanted to see his hands. I don't think it was a legitimate traffic stop. So, of course, any evidence discovered as a result would be subject to suppression. But insofar as a trial date, they'll have a trial date set eventually, but that can be moved. This is a case that I would see going to trial at least no shorter than a year from now. Could be up to 2-3 years, depending on how the investigation unfolds and how any of the pretrial litigation, what takes place in the various rulings by the court.
There we go. All right. So thank you so much. This was Brian Silber, once again, legal analyst, joining us here on Live Now from Fox. We really appreciate it here today on a story that will continue to evolve as the trial and court proceedings continue. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.